Nightcrawler is the X-Men hero I've been waiting for. I'm so excited to talk about him. Here is preview today. I did a reaction with Nelson and I've been working on this video ever since. So I hope you guys enjoy it. We have a lot to get through and in some ways we don't. So that's kind of interesting to talk about as well. So we have Kurt Wagner, free recovery, hand size 6, hit points 9. So Nightcrawler has low hit points, but you can also see in hero form free defense. And if you look at Gambit, and Shadowcat doesn't exactly have free defense, but she might as well have a million. X-Men with good defense don't have to worry about their hit points. They are pretty well off, let's say that. Free recovery is very standard. Hand size is standard, but that's all good. That's no problem. Mutant X-Men trait in respective forms, all fine. What is interesting is that Nightcrawler has free defense, but 2 thwarting. This is really unusual. Most of the free defense characters are consigned to, some sort of awful, hellish realm where they only are allowed to have 1 thwart and they expect to, it's difficult in solo, let's put it that way, if you're a 1 thwart hero. There are some kind of exceptions, there are some workarounds, but Nightcrawler having 3 defense but 2 thwarting is a very, very good stat line. 1 attack is quite low, and I do think actually damage is quite a weakness of his almost. I think he's one of the lower damage heroes in the game, but I wouldn't worry about that, and I wonder if an unrevealed card might help him, so we'll see how we go in the future. But he looks really interesting. I have cooled down a bit since I did that reaction with Nelson. I don't think maybe he's as powerful as I originally thought, but that is not a bad thing. I think he's more balanced, and that is what I think they should be aiming for, in all honesty, relatively. They don't have to do it perfectly in a cooperative game, but yeah, I'm really, really excited to talk about him. So he's got this alter ego action, set your deck for a copy of Banff and add it to your hand. What is Banff? Well, we'll look at it soon, but it is central to Nightcrawler's game plan. So being able to get this central card immediately on turn 1 when you start is incredible. And since you have 3 copies of Banff, which we'll talk about too in a second, there, if you flip down alter ego later on, you're going to be able to get another one out of your deck potentially and use this again. So this is really good. On the hero side of Nightcrawler, we have rapid teleportation. Action, spend 1 resource of any type, return a copy of Banff from your discard pile to your hand. So alter ego, turn 1, you get Banff, and that's going to be basically bouncing between your discard pile and your hand and in play by using Nightcrawler's ability to keep getting it back. Now these are limited once per round / phase, as it were, but 1 copy of Banff is mainly all you need, at least for most situations, most scenarios, as we will see as we go. But I almost don't want to talk about Banff right now. What I want to talk about is how that card is basically your alter ego action and your hero action. Your abilities on your hero cards are all tied to Banff. So when we look at Banff, it punches much, higher above its weight than you might expect for the cost of the card. But that is because it's kind of incorporating your hero and alter ego abilities. Your identity card doesn't really do anything else except get you this card. But nonetheless, I really like this. So we're going to quickly count the cards. We do not know his signature ally or any upgrades, but I do suspect one of them will be his sword, which will probably give him an attack boost and maybe retaliate. This guy's built for retaliate. He needs it. Well, he doesn't need it, but he wants it. You guys will see. 3 copies of Banff, 2 copies of his main attack, Port and Punch, 1 copy of Teleport Drop, which is his sort of big attack, 2 copies of Scout Ahead, which is his forwarding card, 1 copy of Port Away, which is his form change kind of card. He doesn't really have forms, but he can go alter ego with it, which is cool, or, alter ego to hero. And then 2 copies of Tally Ho, which is his defense event. So 2 of his main attack, 2 of his main forwarding, and 2 sort of defense things. He has a very sort of balanced sort of spread of events in his deck, which is interesting. But something I noticed, which I thought was fascinating, is all of these cards here are energy resources, except Banff. So 8 of his cards here are energies, which is unheard of. I think 7 is the highest we have so far. I think that's on Storm and Gambit. So I thought that was cool. And if you're wondering how I managed to count all these cards, it's to do with the little numbers in the corners. Everyone has a signature card number and a unique design number. Not official terms, but that's what I'm going with. So let's get into it and let's finally look at Banff. So Banff is a 0-cost upgrade which you attach to an enemy. When the enemy would attack, you discard Banff and you declare Nightcrawler the defender without exhausting him. What does this mean? Well, if you are declared the defender as a hero, it counts as basic defending. So Nightcrawler can play this 0-cost card, the enemy attacks him, and then he doesn't have to exhaust, but he is defending for free, which is really, really fantastic. So this is an exceptional card. Now, it's kind of like him readying, but it's kind of not, because you cannot use Banff to, say, fort twice or attack and fort. You have to basically defend and ready, and then use your basic activation for whatever after that. But this is still a good card. Now, the reason I wanted to stress so much that This is Nightcrawler's basically hero ability to kind of, have this around. Bamf is better than you'd expect for 0 cost, but you have other characters, like say Spider-Man, Peter Parker, who have really good cards that are maybe, slightly better than they, might normally have, let's say Backflip or Aunt May, but he also gets to draw a card every time the villain attacks, that kind of thing. So there is a slight detriment to Nightcrawler's having this really good card, but that is kind of his ability. So I just want to keep that in mind to keep things a little bit grounded. But Bamf is a fantastic card. Being able to not exhaust but defend and attack means you're going to be able to keep your allies alive. They won't have to block so much for you, which leaves a lot of possibilities. It means you are ready to use that 2 forwarding stat, which for solo is incredible. So threat is not too much of a problem for him in general, at least in solo or maybe even 2-player. That's going to help a lot. So this is really, really good. But the rest of Nightcrawler's kit also kind of revolves around Bamf. So let's have a little look at that. The Tally Ho is a 1-cost event. After Bamf makes Nightcrawler the defender of an attack, return that copy of Bamf to your hand, deal 3 damage to the attacking energy. This is a really good defense card. So by returning Bamf to your hand, it's almost like a 1-cost refund on it. So you could think of Tally Ho almost at 0 cost, but it's also guaranteeing you have Bamf, which we've established is a good, very good card, back into your hand. So this is everything we want. So for that kind of 0 cost, that kind of refunded 1 cost on this card, you're getting 3 damage, and 0 for free is kind of turn the tide territory. Now, the downside is this is locked to the enemy that was attacking, which most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time will be the villain. So it's got pros and cons, but I do like this card. I think it's very interesting. I do find it surprising we keep getting these 1-cost kind of defensive kind of cards that block, free damage in this case, kind of, because that is what Nightcrawler's defense is. And then they deal 3 damage. We have Magic Barrier and we have Force Field Projection from Magic and Nova respectively, which kind of do this as well. So it seems like this is a safe design space. They have decided it's balanced and they are going to do a couple of times. I think it's interesting with Nightcrawler, especially with the way Bamf works. But yeah, I'd be curious to see them do some defense cards which do something as well as defending, like the damage here, but something different. Maybe some threat removal, maybe a status card, maybe just changing something up, triggering something. But I do like Tally Ho. I think it's pretty useful. So where does this leave us? Well, it means Nightcrawler loves defending. It means protection really calls to him as an aspect. So let's see how all this defensive stuff ties into protection. So we have a new card in Nightcrawler's pack called Change of Fortune, which could really change the fortune of protection. 1-cost upgrade, response after you defeat an enemy in the villain phase, exhaust this card, draw 2 cards. So this is huge. So drawing 2 cards is fantastic, and protection does have ways to defeat enemies in the villain phase, and this is obviously going to motivate you to do that. It's something we could do before, but we really didn't have a reason to specifically try and do that. So in some way, this is a new kind of archetype, or this is expanding, into one that was kind of missing a reason to do it. So I love this card, and because Nightcrawler, with his ability to defend without exhausting, kind of, would then be able to defend again. So you can defend the villain and you can defend a minion very easily. And if you're defending from a minion, you could potentially use Tally Ho to blast it for 3 damage, which is good. We also have New Cut Under Control, which is an attachment which lets us deal full damage to a minion if we defend it without taking damage, which Nightcrawler will be able to do no problem. We've also got older cards like Powerful Punch that came with Shadowcat, and that basically makes you deal 4 damage to an enemy as well when they would attack. So you've got a couple of different ways that Nightcrawler might be able to trigger Change of Fortune. And like I said, the synergy with Tally Ho means it is better with him, and also his ability to, defend without exhausting once, so he can defend more often. All these things make this a pretty good archetype for Nightcrawler. Would it be the sort of top of the line, super competitive? Well, depends what player count, depends what kind of minions are even around, because if you don't find any minions, you cannot get any benefit from this. Okay, you could defeat the villain, but that's kind of once a game at best usually. So if you want to damage enemies in the villain phase, we have some other ways to do so. Jocasta can grab your defense event Tally Ho to deal more damage with it that way and get sort of more Bamfs refunded back to your hand. Energy Barrier is a classic card, ping damage back when you take damage. Then we have Electrostatic Armor and Dauntless, which both, when you're taking damage from an attack kind of thing, you can, sort of either officially get Retaliate or get kind of a pseudo Retaliate effect. So you have some ways to kind of, be a bit of a spiky hedgehog, and when the enemies come to attack you, they're kind of the ones taking the damage, which I think is really, really fun. Now, all this defensive talk obviously means that perfect defense is going to be amazing. All these defense cards which say if you defend without taking any damage, you get some kind of benefit. So unflappable, hard to ignore, and we're going to want armored vest because it's 3 copies of Bamf, and that lets you basic defend with basically no consequence of exhausting. Boosting up our basic defense is really valuable here. It basically means every copy of Bamf is worth more. So yeah, every single protection Nightcrawler deck is going to want Armored Vest, no matter what, in my opinion. I think it's very, very good. And if we are able to defend without exhausting, that will leave us free on our hero turn, maybe to exhaust to defend and attack. That's where Taunt comes in. If we can ready effectively defend more attacks, in solo play especially, we might want to create more attacks, get some card draw out of it. So I think that has a lot of potential here. I'm curious to see how that works out. Not mandatory by any means. It's not like this is going to be completely broken with Nightcrawler, but it is interesting to consider. Then we have the energy cards and protection. So Nightcrawler has all his energy resources. Sidestep and Jump Flip are going to be super, super easy to trigger. We also have Nova, the ally that we could trigger with the energy resource, but I don't think Nightcrawler's really going to want Nova. But I thought it's still interesting to talk about the energy synergy here. And that brings us on to the next Nightcrawler event, which is Scout Ahead. This is his thwarting event. It's a 1-cost event, so you can see his kit is already quite cheap. And the action is to thwart, remove 3 threat from a scheme. If this is all it said, 1-cost event, hero action, remove 3 threat, this would be great for a 1-cost event. This would be fine. A lot of heroes, especially older heroes, would kill to have this. Now, Nightcrawler can also discard a copy of Bamf from his hand to remove 3 threat from another scheme. So it kind of becomes a multitasking that can remove 3 and 3. But because you're kind of losing Bamf, you are kind of, spending an extra resource. And because Bamf is such a good card, I'd argue it's kind of more than just an extra card / resource that you're losing for this. I actually think it's fine without discarding Bamf. But if discarding Bamf is going to get you some really necessary threat removal, then you should do it. Now, the downside with Scout Ahead is that you need 2 schemes out with 3 threat on each, and make sure one is not a crisis icon and the other one is the main scheme, because then you'll have maybe a potential issue depending on if you can clear. It's going to be difficult. So Scout Ahead has some little issues like that. It reminds me quite a bit of SPDR, Spider's forwarding card rapid deployment, and if you include, getting rid of Bamf being kind of the extra cost, they do kind of equal out slightly. And then we've got multitasking, which is obviously probably the most famous forwarding card, which hits 2 different schemes. And Scout Ahead basically costs 1 more, kind of, maybe arguably 2 more, but it removes 2 extra threat. And you don't have to use its effect to hit another scheme. You can just have it, free threat from that 1 scheme, which gives it that flexibility. So I do like Scout Ahead. It's not mind-blowing value, but it's really, pretty good value. I'm very, very happy to see that he has it. So that is pretty cool. Then we have Justice cards to talk about, because there's not much else to talk about apart from his basic 2 forwarding and his forwarding card, in terms of what Justice really cares about. So because this forwarding card he has can hit multiple schemes, operative skill and passion for justice, the upgrade and resource respectively, that boost your forwarding, pretty good. Yeah. So you can now make Scout Ahead. Instead of removing 3 and 3 threat, remove 4 and 4 threat, or maybe if you use both, 5 and 5 threat. So kind of interesting. I don't think this will be, a dominant strategy. Deck space is really tight these days, and it's easy to overthought on things, at least in the solo play. But I thought it was interesting to talk about nonetheless. And speaking of, events that can thwart from multiple schemes, we have Even the Odds. Even the Odds loves Passion for Justice and Operative Skill as well, because Even the Odds hits all the side schemes on the board. This card is a powerhouse in, 3 and 4 player, especially 4 player, and has a requirement of energy, which, as we've seen, Nightcrawler can meet that pretty easily. So Nightcrawler in a 4 player might be a pretty good candidate to run Even the Odds. He's going to be able to hit all these different schemes fairly well. And we also have the new card from Jubilee, which can potentially hit 3 different schemes. So if we're running Operative Skill and Passion for Justice to boost up his forwarding event, maybe we can boost this up as well. It's a little bit niche. It's a little bit kind of out there. You're going to have to try and hit these other resource icons to get proper value. But I thought it was an interesting thing to consider. But for the most part, I think Even the Odds and maybe Passion for Justice, they're kind of calling me with Nightcrawler. But I don't think Nightcrawler has a ton of, other synergy with Justice. And this is maybe a good point to talk about. I don't think he has a ton of synergy in general with a lot of the aspect stuff, which is a downside in some ways because, there's no, really, wow, random unique interaction that only he can do with some of this stuff. But what it means is he almost reminds me of an old school hero because a lot of the old heroes aren't specifically built into these special hooks and special gimmicks and things quite as much. They're a bit more, I don't want to say plain, but more kind of broad in what they do. They're not so specific. This kind of means you're not driven to really build a hero in one specific way or lose value. It kind of lets you build that hero in different interesting ways. You can kind of work around their kit in terms of, cost value more on what you need. And almost in some ways, by having less hooks into the aspects that really grip you, you can have more freedom to explore those aspects with the character. So I don't necessarily see this as a negative. I'm actually quite excited to, explore Nightcrawler in these different ways. So I thought that was interesting to mention. So that's basically just as far as I'm concerned for Nightcrawler. He can do other things with it, but they're not particularly special to him. So next up we have his big attack event. I want to show that off. And that is Teleport Drop, which is brutal. Look at him dropping this guy. 2-cost event, does 8 damage. Seems pretty good. The catch is you have to discard Bamf from an enemy, which means basically it's almost an extra cost of a card, maybe slightly higher as we discussed because it's such a good card that he revolves around. So what do you get for that? Well, if we consider Teleport Drop to be 3 cost and doing 8 damage, it's swinging Web Kick, but it stuns an enemy as well, which is really, really good. So I do like Teleport Drop, and because the enemy is stunned, a lot of the time, notably in solo play, it doesn't matter that Bamf isn't on the enemy to let you defend for free, because the enemy is stunned. So that's excellent. So I do like Teleport Drop a lot. What we're starting to see with these events, though, is all of his events are asking for Bamf. So if you have multiple events that want you to discard Bamf, and you've only got 1 copy of Bamf, you're going to have to make a decision. Now, what's really interesting is that with his forwarding event, you don't have to discard it for just good value. You can just not discard Bamf, get that free forwarding. It's still good. Teleport Drop, you have to discard Bamf, so you cannot use it without it. So I do think this will lead to different interesting decision points, as I mentioned before. I do think that's really fascinating, so I'm curious to see how this works out in practice. But Teleport Drop is going to be a very good card, notably for solo play, because you're really probably hitting the villain with this. And yeah, it's going to push you a lot closer to victory while giving you a ton of breathing room, which I think is pretty good. Then we have Port and Punch. Here's 2 copies of this. This is his main attack, and it really, really reminds me of Ricochet Beam. Both of these cards are 2 cost, super power attacks. They both deal 3 damage to one enemy and 3 damage to an enemy with an upgrade. Now, Cyclops with Ricochet Beam will hit an enemy with any kind of upgrade. Port and Punch requires you to have Bamf attached to that enemy to hit them. But unlike the other events we're seeing, it is not in any way, shape, or form consuming Bamf. So in some ways, you can think of every copy of Bamf you have out as an extra 3 damage. This means you could potentially get 12 damage from this card, which is kind of insane, but you would need multiple targets to do that, as Bamf is a max 1 of per enemy, and the chances are very slim this will ever line up, if I'm honest. So realistically, you're probably getting 3 damage guaranteed, really honestly 6 damage guaranteed, as you can always find a copy of Bamf, and maybe you'll get, 9, maybe you get an extra copy to put on a minion somewhere. But the problem with using this card to take out minions is if the minion's defeated, Bamf gets discarded, so you're kind of losing the value of that Bamf. So you do have to pay a little bit of a price for this, but overall I do still think this is a good solid attack. Better at villain damage than minion damage, but still good to have. Reminds me a little bit of Icy Blast as well, because every enemy with a Frostbite gets hit. Here, every enemy with Bamf attached gets hit. Interestingly, unlike a lot of events that can hit up to, basically 4 targets, this one still retains the attack, category, whereas a lot of them just lose that and are plain damage, like Icy Blast. So potentially, if you can boost the damage of Port and Punch, you will get some nice return, and that is what we're going to look at with aggression. I really like potentially using Warrior Skill and Aggressive Energy, just like we looked at his forwarding event, which can hit 2 different targets. Now that his attack event can hit potentially, 4 targets, I think here. You can get a lot of value out of Warrior Skill and Aggressive Energy, potentially, 1 extra damage to each target, 4 damage total, respectively, from each. So that can lead to a lot of stuff overall. Although, again, you're not going to be hitting 4 targets very much, but definitely hitting 2 or 3, very viable. So that's interesting. And if we're building into Aggressive Energy and Warrior Skill, we probably want 1 by 1, which I think is actually a very underrated event. I don't see people talk about this card, but I love this card, especially for multiplayer. And I mean, 2 to player up, honestly, still very, very good. There's a 1-cost event, it hits 2 enemies. You have to defeat the first one, but you can just boost it up with Aggressive Energy and Warrior Skill, as we'll be probably using maybe for our other events here. And I did want to mention Wasp as well. With all those energy resources in the deck, we will actually be able to pay for Wasp's Interrupt pretty easily to get her some extra health. We also have the upgrade kind of nature of Nightcrawler. So attaching Bamf to a target will enable Take That, which is a new attack with Iceman. It's 3 cost, does 7 damage to an enemy with an upgrade. Again, probably better for solo play, and we'll see this with Shark Girl and Glob as well. These both are new allies which get benefits uh, against an enemy with an upgrade, but that's mostly going to be the villain. And what that means is these are kind of more solo cards, in my opinion. They're not going to help you control the board, which I think is what mostly aggression is, most valuable for in multiplayer. So it's fine, but I'm probably using this more in solo to end games a little bit quicker. I'm not super sold on it. I think Shark Girl is potentially very good, but yeah, we'll see how this goes. But he can use these better than most heroes, so that is pretty cool. Then we have Sunfire. Again, it's just an ally that benefits from an energy resource, especially. And everyone wants Sunfire, but Nightcrawler will be super consistent with Sunfire. Next up, I want to talk about Port Away, which is his form-changing card. It's a zero-cost card, and as an action, you get to discard a copy of Bamf from your hand, change forms, and ready your identity. So this is really interesting. If you use Nightcrawler's hero ability to find a copy of Bamf, you can basically guarantee getting to Alter Ego with this. But alternatively, you can just flip Alter Ego, use your action to fish a remaining copy of Bamf out of your deck, and then you can Port Away back to hero form. So you can use this either way around, which is really interesting. And you're probably going to be ready because Bamf doesn't make you exhaust in the villain phase to get that defense going. So you should be able to go Alter Ego and heal if you need to, then go back down, or trick any Alter Ego stuff, get rid of any obligations or something. So kind of interesting. It is very comparable to Double Life from Miles. It is, if you include the discarding of Bamf as an extra cost, equal to a one cost kind of thing. Kind of, I do think Bamf is good enough that it's kind of a little bit extra, but nonetheless, you are getting to change form and ready, just like that. So it's kind of following the blueprint. And if we remove the readying, we can kind of take it down to just a zero cost card, and that would be like Body Slide for Cable in solo play at least. Now, there is only one copy of Port Away, which means I don't think you'll want to build into things like Surprise Attack or Perseverance, because yeah, you can change to hero and Alter Ego in a different way than most characters. You get an extra basically form change with this card when it comes around, but with any one of it is not consistent. But there do exist a couple of cards that benefit you from occasionally flipping to Alter Ego, and that's Hall of Heroes and Angel's Airy. So Angel's Airy is after you defend an attack, place a counter there, so you can kind of bank this healing for when Port Away does turn up. You can flip down and get it, go back to hero form, and continue defending all the time. This is really, really good. Now, whether a 9 hit point hero will, necessarily have enough hit points to benefit from Angel's Airy after it's really built up and things, it's slightly awkward. It's not a must include by any means, but it is better for Nightcrawler than I would say the majority of heroes, which is worth a mention. Hall of Heroes is really interesting. This is a very famous card, old as time itself at this point for the card game. And yeah, defeat enough minions, you can get some cards. And Port Away just makes it particularly easy to get down, to get those cards, get back, use them immediately. So I do think that is quite nice as well. If you had to build an aggression Nightcrawler, particularly a multiplayer with lots of minions, very, very good. And that actually does it for Nightcrawler's cards. So we've seen his 2 attacks, the big attack, which is 1 copy of, where he drops people and stuns them. His 2 normal attacks, which, can hit multiple enemies. His falling card, which can hit multiple schemes. And he's got Bamf, which is really, really good. And of course, Tally-Ho's defense event, kind of, getting some extra damage and returning Bamf. So he's all around Bamf. He wants to discard it for most of his events and things, but it also has so much value if you put it onto the enemy, notably the villain. So going to be a bit of a Colossus situation. Do I use that tough to block an attack, or do I spend it to use an event? But whereas with Colossus, I think the events are generally much higher value, I actually don't know if his events are that much better than just using Bamf itself to take less damage. So for Nightcrawler, I think it might be a tougher decision, and I'm curious to see how it works out, and if any of the unrevealed cards interact with Bamf in a way that might make us reconsider the value of these different options. But let's move into the remaining sort of aspects and things we haven't talked about yet alongside all this. And first of all, we have the basic cards. He has a lot of superpowers and a lot of events that cost 1 or 2 resources. So X-Gene and Death Focus are both going to be very, very desirable for Nightcrawler, and that Port Away card letting him change form will make X-Gene just that little bit easier to get into play and actually benefit from on the same turn, and I think that is pretty good. We then have Mutant Education, and this sprang to mind to put Bamf back into his deck to be able to use your Alter Ego action to grab it some more and things like that. But I don't really think he wants to go Alter Ego. I think Bamf's main value is on the villain to basically give you an extra, an easy way to defend without exhausting. So to me, Nightcrawler actually doesn't want to go Alter Ego that much. The X-Men mutant stuff in Alter Ego is good, so maybe I think builds with mutant education will be very viable. But for me personally, this isn't calling to me. I don't think the flow of his gameplay is gonna. I think you're gonna have to slightly go out of your way to make this really worthwhile. Yes, you can, put a way to briefly flip down, but one copy of it isn't consistent enough to make this worth it for me. So I'm not sold on it, but we'll have to see what happens and see if he has any, maybe extra Alter Ego stuff in his remaining cards we haven't seen. I don't think so, but it could happen. Then we have Hope Summers, and Hope Summers makes you find a superpower card from your deck. This is basically all of his cards except Bamf. So Hope will give you a lot of power over what you do. If you play Hope, you can basically end up getting some extra damage or some extra forwarding, whatever you need. So I think that's pretty useful to have. And then we've got Specialized Training. Now, one of the rewards from this gives you a bonus to defense, and if you defend, you draw a card, and that upgrade is obviously very good for Nightcrawler. You can basically basic defend without exhausting, so I think that's going to be fantastic in basically every aspect deck for him, particularly Justice, which can get rid of it easily, and particularly Protection, which can get some extra benefits from defending. Then we have the X-Men in basic. This, kind of goes without saying at this point, but obviously the X-Men stuff in the sort of basic quote-unquote aspect, it's not a real aspect. It's just going to be so good for Nightcrawler because it's really good for all the X-Men. Then we need to talk about the ally upgrades. I'll just talk about them all at once here. The X-Men training stuff that you can put on your allies, really, really good. Because Nightcrawler can defend for himself 99.9% of the time, it means your allies are free to survive and get more uses out of them, which just makes this really good. Now, Nightcrawler has a very, very low cost curve, and so these upgrades, it's just going to make it easy to maneuver and, game time as well, obviously. So that's going to be pretty good, I think. I actually think he's going to be very, very, maybe in Justice and Aggression in particular, inclined to perhaps do this. Then we can talk about leadership, and wow, just like every X-Men in leadership, Uncanny X-Men is such a good card that it is basically going to be an extremely good build for Nightcrawler, especially again as he doesn't need to defend, so you get more use out of them. Now, a bit more interesting for leadership is because he can defend so much, you can build up those allies. You can use strength in numbers to turn those allies into card draw. And the big catch here, which I'm wondering about whether it's worth it, is if you get a bunch of your own events drawn from strength in numbers, you won't be able to play them because you probably won't have enough copies of Bamf to fulfill all the requirements of all of them. You might do, so we'll have to see how this works in practice, and he will obviously have other cards that you can play from leadership to do things, etc, etc. But yeah, strength in numbers, he's going to be able to use easily, but whether it's worth it, we'll have to wait and see. X23, I think, is particularly interesting for Nightcrawler. So one of the things that I think makes Aggression actually stand out as kind of decent for him is that I think Nightcrawler lacks damage. Yeah, he's got 3 attack events. They're pretty decently costed, but again, for taking out minions, his Port and Punch isn't ideal. X23 is the absolute perfect solution to minions. Nightcrawler also only has 1 attack. X23 with 3 attack and the ability to ready can just clear a board of minions potentially. So she's going to be very, very helpful to shore up that weakness of his of kind of taking out minions. Then we have Captain Marvel. Super expensive, crazy expensive, low cost curve Nightcrawler. Does he want this card? Well, what's interesting from Captain Marvel is that the more energies she discards, the more benefits you get. She discard 1 as part of her response to playing her, which is discard 4 cards. You deal 3 damage, and if you get a second energy resource, you get to stun that enemy. So she's very, very efficient if you hit 2 energies. Nightcrawler can do that better than most characters. And we now have new X-Men toys like Triage, which I believe is a ally with the energy resource. So things are looking good for energy resource decks, although unfortunately there's not a ton of things that benefit from them, but Captain Marvel does benefit from those energies, so worth a mention. Then we have the pool aspect, and I looked long and hard at this aspect, guys, and I don't think there's any special interactions here. Nightcrawler can run a really good pool deck, just because anyone can run a good pool deck, but it won't be special, it won't stand out, and it'll probably be worse than all the other aspects, by a notable margin. So, it is what it is. So that kind of brings us to the summary of what I'll be looking for Nightcrawler in his decks. So for leadership, I'm looking at Uncanny decks, I'm looking at Danger Room Training, Strength in Numbers, maybe, Captain Marvel, maybe. So nothing super, super special here for him, but kind of interesting with the Captain Marvel thing, I think. We'll see if it's worth it, because stunning an enemy when you have Bamf, it's kind of, they're competing with each other to a small degree. So we'll see how that looks. But leadership, I think, will be really good for him because leadership is just really good, and these are all very flexible kind of builds. Then we have aggression, which again, multi attacks is the big thing calling out to me as unique. Also, being able to use those upgrades quite well, things that benefit from the minion upgrades. I don't think he'll want the upgrades that you can put on minions beyond Bamf, maybe, but we'll see how that works out. And of course, attack training, which is probably, if I had to guess, going to be the more powerful option, but I'd like to see how things play out. Then we have protection, and this is probably the aspect of his I'm looking forward to the most. I think it's probably going to be his best aspect. At least, leadership is just so ridiculously valuable in general. But the more value you get out of Banff, the better for Nightcrawler, and this is where you can find it. Perfect defense is going to be amazing. Change of fortune to defeat things in the villain phase is going to be really good. You can build into as much retaliate and kind of things like that as you want. Really good for change of fortune, especially obviously, but you can still do it with perfect defense, and you can still do it with taunt. And then we have justice, which is, it doesn't blow me away. I definitely am looking mostly at protection, I think, for Nightcrawler. But I do like justice here. Just the multi-fording thing is very, very valuable in multiplayer. And if you're running, say, skilled investigator and some player side schemes, you're going to be able to get some cards because his fording event hits for free, which in solo play is what most player side schemes take. So, it's kind of got something there, but again, not blowing me away. Love, love, love protection for him. Aggression, leadership, they're okay. Justice, it's fine. I mean, these are going to all be really good and viable for him. I think Justice will be powerful just because, at least in solo, so good, and in multiplayer, so vital. But yeah, I'm mostly looking at protection. Don't really want to talk about Paul for him. It's fine. It's not bad. It's just not amazing. So that brings me to the final summary of how I think Nightcrawler will be. And I've gone for this. So 3 damage. This is, kind of average for damage in a way. 3 stars is in the middle. But all heroes are very, very high damage. So actually, I think Nightcrawler is a low damage hero. Probably, I'm going to just call it now the lowest damage X-Men character we have got. We'll see if that holds true, but I'm pretty confident in that. Fording is free as well. I think his fording thing is good, but you need 2 schemes out. So in solo play, there are going to be turns where you can't get the extra benefit. So it would just be a 1-cost card for free threat removal. Still good, but only 2 copies of it. I think he'll feel like he has higher fording for this just because he won't be exhausted very much from defending. Or, you can use his allies for more activations too for instead of defend with those, that kind of thing. So maybe this should artificially be 4 stars, but I think in multiplayer, you're not going to be able to turn on the fording and clear all the schemes like a character with 4 or 5 stars in fording, in my opinion, would be able to. Survivability is 5 stars. Maybe this should be 6. Bamf is good. Defend for free without exhausting. Then hey, if you need to, defend for 3 more. He can basically, from turn 1, almost guarantee taking 6 less damage. Very, very good. Economy, I put at 3 stars. He can work with X-Gene and Death Focus, so great. But as far as his own hero kit goes, doesn't really have anything to boost his economy. In Rodrigo, yeah, you can get a copy of Bamf, maybe you could spend it, but that doesn't really impress me too much. So kind of even here. We'll see how that plays out with his other upgrades and things. Then we have control. We've given it 2 stars. It's better than 1 star, which I typically is, is 0 control for me. So 2 stars basically means, hey, he has a stun. He has 1 stun. Great. I don't think he's worried too much because there's all that good defense, but definitely something to note. Speed of setup is a weird one because we've not seen his proper upgrades he wants to play on, the player side of the board. We've seen Bamf, which goes on the enemies, mainly the villain. So I don't know. Maybe he's going to have 3 absolutely vital upgrades, which really power him up. But given that all his kit is really cheap and seems pretty decent, if not, completely mind-blowing without any upgrades, I don't think he's going to, massively demand upgrades. So I think he will set up pretty quickly. But, I've got that kind of question mark on the end here because I'm not sure if it's going to... It's probably, in my opinion, in the final kind of verdict, once I played him, going to end up between 3 and 5. I doubt it would be any worse than that. So, yeah, we'll see how that pans out. Reliability, I put at 4 stars, but this is kind of a weird one. If you don't have your attack events, you won't have much damage. If you don't have Bamf, an extra copy of it. If you have too many of your events, you might not be able to trigger all of them the way you want to. But at the same time, being able to return Bamf to your hand every single turn with either your hero or alter ego ability, and maybe you use both on 1 turn and get 2 of them, that is going to be useful in terms of that, that reliability. You will at least be able to do your Bamf thing at once per turn, which is a kind of reliability. So we'll see how that pans out. I could move this down to 3 and up to 5 as well. I don't see him being, a 2 reliability character. And, in some of these heroes, I give them a bonus 6-star, rather than out of 5 stars. Uh, he's probably not going to get that in any of these, I don't think. Card value, I put at 3 stars. 3 stars is pretty good, though, for card value. It's average, it's fine. It's not what the X-Men are used to, but it's what a lot of the Avengers are used to, put it that way. So we'll see. I can easily see this with good upgrades moving up to 4. If one of them is completely busted, it could elevate things to 5, but probably I'm seeing this at 4 highest with the real deal. Ease of play, I've put at 2. I just think what I've learned from Colossus, being able to use Tufts for multiple purposes, being able to use Bamps for multiple purposes, might be more complicated than it first appears. Lots of different ways you could do that. So I think he might be tricky to get the kind of, quote unquote optimal play. But overall, not too bad, because you're just putting Bamf on the villain a lot of the time and then defending without exhausting and having more kind of resources to play around with other things. But yeah, we'll see how that pans out. Variety, I put at 4. And I'm not blown away with what he can kind of combo with in most of the aspects. But I think with his stat line, he's going to be viable in every aspect, which means without being particularly drawn to certain cards too much in certain aspects, like the multi-forwarding, multi-attack, it's slightly niche or maybe more multiplayer. I think solo play especially, you're going to be able to build him how you want to in a lot of these ways, into allies, into events. For forwarding, basic forwarding, I think is going to be an option with him. In fact, if he has an upgrade which boosts his forwarding up 1, I wouldn't be surprised either, although I don't think we'll see it. But forwarding is often tied to movement abilities, and he can teleport, so could happen. There could be some extra forwarding in there. So yeah, we'll see how that goes, but I actually think he'll kind of have decent variety just because he's not too tied into anything. Fun, I don't like to predict before playing him, but that decision point really interests me. Colossus, I thought I wasn't going to be interested in. Oh, he's just a big guy with high health and hits hard. Pretty plain, just, he's a brawler. The decisions with your Tufts, absolutely phenomenal. I think Bamf is going to be similar here, which means for me, he's going to really appeal to me. I do love the kind of, not having to exhaust to defend. I hate I hate the spending to exhaust. So that is fantastic. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. Where do I think Nightcrawler is going to end up overall based on all this information? Well, I'm going with less a kind of, tier ranking here, and I don't think it's super useful in a cooperative game. I'm kind of moving away from the tier kind of, categorizations a bit, but also basically all the X-Force characters and also Magic and Bishop who we've just had for the X-Men are all basically fighting to get an S tier, or either very high, strong characters in A tier. Maybe 1 or 2 are lower down in A tier, but long story short, the old tier list, all the new characters are fighting to get in the top, 20, 30% of it, which is really kind of distorted, I think, the values these things give. Because realistically, putting all these new characters high up pushes the old characters down. But I think if I were to say A tier for Nightcrawler, in people's heads, they're still probably running on what they considered A tier to be, an expansion or 2 ago. So for me, in the current pool of heroes, which is very, very strong, some characters that I consider, really strong are now around the middle of the pack, which is insane to think about. I'm putting Nightcrawler in that top 50%. I just think not having to exhaust to defend is going to give you flexibility. 2 forwarding is going to always be, ready to use. And he's got the X-Men and mutant traits, which are kind of going to carry him up. And, Bamf seems very consistent in that you can get it every turn. So things are lined up to be good for Nightcrawler, but balanced. Now, again, an upgrade we don't know about could blow things out of the water, could really change everything. But we'll have to wait and see on that front. I'm not so sure. And yeah, that about does it here. How do you think Nightcrawler stacks up? Am I completely off the mark? And liking or commenting, all this stuff helps push the video and support the channel. And that's kind of become a big thing recently. I've actually opened up YouTube memberships and a Patreon. If you're interested, definitely you can check out those links below. And I believe Nelson is going to post a video of his 5 decks he's most looking forward to trying with Nightcrawler, probably in a couple of days' time, maybe a few days. I don't really know, but keep an eye out for that. I'll try and link it somewhere below as well when that happens. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.